Welcome back to the Geek Warning podcast. I am your host this week, Ronan McLaughlin, and I'm your host because we have a bit of a deep dive special episode this week, diving into the Tour de France time trial that we witnessed earlier this week. Some say one of the most, if not the most impressive time trial performance of all time from Jonas Vingagaard, who, as we record this, looks like he's about to go on and win the Tour de France. He's got a 7.5 minute lead, so he could take the next few stages as recovery days almost, and still have enough time in hand to maintain his lead into Paris. And I am joined for this special episode of Geek Warning by an EscapeCollective member and an expert in all things aerodynamics. That is Marc Graveline, who is... Well, Marc, we just discussed how I might introduce you, and I think you did a much better job than I could. So I might throw to you to give us some of your background as into your sort of your understanding and your expertise and your history within the time trial and aerodynamic scene.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. So a little bit of history, I guess. I worked my entire career in software and big data. The company I was working for, I was the vice president engineering, was acquired by IBM. That and another acquisition, they allowed me to retire relatively early and pursue my passion was triathlon and cycling. I was doing the whole Ironman thing. And so I retired 2013, was doing the triathlon thing and not being very talented, being old and not very strong. I figured I'd probably have to work a little smarter. So I got into, aerodynamics and figuring it out and all the math that goes with it. And then I ran into the folks from Argon 18, and they saw that, based on my knowledge of aero and based on my work experience, they asked me to do a startup with them. And that's when we developed the Notio aerometer. So, I guess I could lay claim to that. I was the inventor and the founder of Notio. And through that partnership, through that, work that I was doing with Argon, I got to work very closely with the Astana team from 2016 to, I guess, 2018, 2019. So that was a lot of fun. And what's great about the World Tour is you meet people and you develop relationships and friendships, and these people go to other teams. And soon enough, I was looking recently, and I probably know a person on every team out there. And that's led me to some cooperations with a handful of World Tour teams on the aero side in different functions or different areas of expertise, from team time trialing to individual time trialing to efficiency and rolling resistance, all this kind of stuff.
And for those who don't know, a Notio device that you've mentioned there is effectively an aerometer. It's an on-bike aerometer based around a pitot tube that you can use to sort of measure your CDA on a bike, and then obviously everything that you can do from that in terms of improving your aerodynamics, improving your position and that. And we've seen so many of these aero sensors sort of emerge now, but I think Notio was one of the first, wasn't it?
Yes, it was the first commercially available aerometer. And I guess when I left in 2019, I wanted to do what I thought would be the next step in aerodynamics, in measuring the things that impact CDA rather than just purely measuring CDA. So, for example, we noticed a lot that when the riders in the wind tunnel and riders on the road were doing very different things. So we wanted to be able to capture those different things to figure out, what are the things that truly impact CDA, and if we can measure them, how can we improve them? And but unfortunately, in order to do that, you have to have a very accurate underlying aerometer to get very accurate CDA. And for the type of things that we were looking at doing, we didn't feel that there was anything on the market yet. So we chose to develop our own aerometer on top of the sensors that we were going to use for measuring these efficiencies and inefficiencies. So that's how we got to where we are today. And just chatting before the show, I think that's going to be a big part of the conversation. Is there's more to a CDA captured in a wind tunnel to analyze these results.
Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned there, the conversation we were having before we hit record here and over the past couple of days has been, let's just say I hope this podcast can be half as fascinating as everything we've discussed over the past few days. Briefly, before we go on that, you mentioned you are now developing a new aero sensor. You've called it the Gizmo, and you're working with some World Tour teams, some teams in the Tour de France now, utilizing that aero sensor and sort of helping those teams optimize for time trials, team time trials. So you're still very, very much involved.
Absolutely. I must say, since the time trial, the phone or the WhatsApp has been buzzing, absolutely buzzing. What do you think about this? What do you think about this? What about this? Did you ever measure this? So absolutely, still quite involved. I would say, half my time is out testing the gizmo and trying things that people ask me about. And the other half is analyzing the data.
Good stuff. Well, just before we delve into the actual time trial analysis here, I want to just take a second to mention that this podcast is only possible thanks to the generous support of our EscapeCollective members. And yeah, I'm not just, it seems extra relevant this week given that our guest expert here is actually also an EscapeCollective member and has been from about day one, I believe. So
Correct.
This podcast has no ads. This is not an ad read, and it does not happen for nothing. So this is just a brief reminder that if you're listening to this podcast and you like what you hear, please consider ensuring that it will continue to happen by signing up at escapecollective.com/join for one of our monthly or annual memberships, with the monthly membership starting at basically $12, and there's a 30% saving on an annual membership. So yeah, without further delay then, let's delve into it. I mean, I know the question on most of our lips this week is, what did we just witness? That time trial was pretty phenomenal. I think one of the things we'll keep coming back to during this podcast is, we're obviously going to discuss Jonas Vingagaard's performance in depth, but let's not also lose sight of the fact that Tadej Pogačar also did an incredible time trial, put over a minute into Wout van Aert in third place. Some of the data and graphs that have been popping up since suggest that Pogačar was every bit as far ahead of the rest of the field as he was on the Planche de Belfi time trial in 2020. It's just this time there was somebody else who was even further ahead than Pogačar is. I guess the question to open up with here, Mark, is just, did you predict what we've seen happening on Tuesday would happen before it happened?
No, and listening to a lot of podcasts and a lot of experts, I'm glad to see everybody is as surprised as I was. Maybe coming back to things that we said previously. One of the things that we try to do is understand the difference between what we see in wind tunnels and what we see in road testing and what we see in racing. We try to understand it. So to understand it, we have to have software that can take race results and that we can actually pull apart all the data and figure out what actually happened. So we take weather data from the weather stations. We take power meter data when we have it. We take CDA data and we try to model what we expect finish times to be. So we can take things like Jonas's published weight and what we think is world-class CDA, and we can plug it in, and we can guess a finishing time. We don't know if there's going to be we can't predict a tailwind or headwind or those kind of things, but we can come pretty close. So I had done some modeling before, and no, I could not have predicted something that fast.
How much faster was it than what you did predict?
What was the difference between Vingagaard and Tadej?
Wasn't it 1 minute 38, if I remember correctly?
Yeah. If you look at the, if you take best case scenarios, in terms of what's a world-class CDA in the wind tunnel, and if you bring that to the road, and then if you look at some world-class watt per kilo climbs, there's a big chunk of this was climbing. I think it was over 50% was done of the time was spent on those two uphills, and you plug them all in. I think Jonas's numbers were rather exceptional. It looks like everything went absolutely perfectly, absolutely perfectly. Typically, if you look at a CDA, a world-class CDA in the wind tunnel, you know that if you don't hold the perfect line, if you don't take the curves perfectly, the actual or effective CDA will be a bit higher. To get to Jonas's numbers, I have to keep his CDA, almost wind tunnel perfect. He has to have an exceptional climbing day. I think the gentleman in the polka dot jersey at Ciccone, I believe it is.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think he did a little bit better on the climb on a road bike than Jonas did in terms of time. But I think he also, from what I understand, he probably held back a bit in order to get that segment. I'm not sure what the proper term is. So Jonas had the best CDA. Jonas had the best watts per kilo. He had everything going for him. Everything.
Yeah, Ciccone had specifically targeted the mountains points because he's in the polka dot jersey, and so he had taken the opening phase of the time trial relatively easy. Let's consider it something along the lines of what you would normally do for a warm up for a time trial is probably what he was doing, so that he would arrive at the climb in a state that he was ready to attack a climb as fast as possible, and his equipment and everything was optimized for the climb. And yes, he did beat Vingagaard, but not by very much. And Vingagaard had done the entire time trial fast. And you mentioned everything went perfectly. I've actually spoke to Mathieu Heibor, the Jumbo-Visma's head of performance since, and it was clear that on the day everything went absolutely perfectly. What Mathieu was telling me was that actually the past 12 months, everything has gone entirely perfectly for the past 12 months. Coming into the Tour last year, they had said that Vingagaard had been injured, had been sick, had missed training throughout the build up. Not huge amounts because he was obviously in fantastic condition, but it just hadn't gone perfectly, the build up to last year's Tour. Whereas this year, from the moment he started his winter training, whatever, it couldn't have went any better apparently from step to step. And he sort of joked that the only hiccup along the way was, I think it was a stage of Gran Camino that was shortened because of snow back in February or March. And that was sort of the only hiccup along the way. So all that build-up went perfectly. The question I was going to ask you there is, you've mentioned a couple of times world-class CDA. What is a world-class CDA number these days?
So I think Dan Bingham has broken that floor. I guess it's not a ceiling. He's broken the floor. He's
in the basement.
He's yeah. I think on the road, I suspect guys like Jonas are very close to that 0.17, maybe slightly under. I'm struggling to, and that's in a wind tunnel. There's no way that, he didn't hold a 0.165 or a 0.17 for the whole thing. He was out of aero for some of the climbing when he was going around some of those turns. He was, I did some modeling with him at a 0.17, for example. So, we don't know his power and we don't know his CDA. So, but what you can do is you can set a CDA at 0.17 and see how many watts he has to do, or you can set him at 6.6, 6.7 watts per kilo, and you can see what his CDA would have to be. And very quickly you see that you have to set both things at the two extremes, the lowest CDA and the most watts per kilo. So coming back to, he had a perfect day, that's he looks absolutely aero. He looks absolutely beautiful when he rides the bike. I remember you referred to his all season has been going well. There was a time trial, not a team time trial. There was a time trial a few months back that he destroyed, and I did some analysis for a team, and sure enough, his CDA had to be, incredibly low at that point. So, I think Jonas having an incredible CDA is not something new.
He's also, we probably have to consider also that, he is, first of all, one of the points I wanted to make earlier was just this course, if it was ever going to bring GC riders to the fore, a time trial course, it was going to be this time trial course with, we're talking about the climb at the end, but there was a climb at the start also.
Yeah.
And then obviously there's a descent in between the two climbs, and we've seen just how fast Vingagaard was riding on that descent. But what we did notice throughout also was just how disciplined, let's say, he was in his time trial position and how well he was able to maintain it. You think back to the likes of Contador and that, 10, 12, 15 years ago, or whatever it was. They looked very, very aero at the time, but they were sort of all over the place, shuffling back and forth in the saddle and up and down. And, you take a wind tunnel CDA measurement, and typically the rider can sustain that because they're not riding just as hard, but take that position out to the outdoors, and 2.5 weeks into a Grand Tour, and all the fatigue that's in the system and all that shuffling that starts happening, that does really, really affect your CDA quite a lot. Add into that also that, Jonas is just a very small person. That's why he's so good at climbing. And, a CDA figure that is achievable for Jonas, I assume, isn't going to be achievable for someone like Van Aert or Ganna or even Pogačar. Is that fair to assume that, that if we assume that the two guys are doing similar watts per kilo because they've been side by side on the climbs for most of this race, Vingagaard is almost going to have an advantage going to the time trial because he is just so much smaller, and he is therefore going to have a lower CDA in his optimized position. Is that, am I simplifying it too much there, or is that the case?
No, I don't think you're simplifying it. I think you're right. One guy that has kind of gone under the radar because of all the noise that this has made is Pello Bilbao, who came fourth. And Pello's a pretty light guy. And he's a very aero guy. He's working with one of the best in the industry over at Bahrain, and I take his numbers in terms of his what I believe his weight and CDAs are, which are world class, and I plug them in, and they're more in line with the Wouts and the Tadejas in terms of watts per kilo on the climbs, and speeds on the different sections. Another thing, the models that we break it down into sections so we can compare, does our model fit well on the climbs, and does it fit well on the descents, and does it fit well on the flats? So from what I can see, Pello was probably more in line with the Wouts and the Tadejas, and Jonas was just one notch above. Not ridiculously above, but definitely above.
Well, I guess that's one of the things I wanted to ask you there. You're mentioning CDA numbers like 0.17 with 2 decimal places, and a lot of the time we see them out to 3 and 4 decimal places. But it's at least in my head, it's difficult to sort of fathom how much of a difference a a 0.001 of a change in CDA will make. It's not as easy to understand as, well, if you lose 1 kilogram or you gain 1 kilogram in body weight, it's going to have this amount of effect. How much difference is a change of 0.01 or 0.001 going to have here? Because that's a minute change, but can that answer the differences that we're seeing between these performances?
Yeah, so 0.001 will translate to 1 watt at 48 kilometers an hour on a flat course. Okay, so 0.0, rule of thumb on a flat course, remove altitude and everything, 0.001 will make a 1 watt difference. On the climbs, it's making very, very, very little difference. The watts that are going to go to drag are not linear with speed. It's almost to the cube. So, if you're going 36 kilometers an hour and you want to go 10% faster, it requires 30% more watts to overcome aero drag. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that gets worse at 44 and 48 and 50 kilometers an hour. So when Jonas was climbing, he was not a 0.017, nor did he need to be. And if he was and when he was climbing, if he was a 0.3, it made very, very, very little difference. There were times they were going 18 kilometers an hour, I believe. Mm-hmm. It makes no difference at that point. At that point.
So then, if we take that to the next level, then if we assume Pogacar was somewhere around 0.18 and Vingagaard, as you said, was 0.17.
Yeah.
How much difference is that making?
So I ran numbers, for example. I had Tadej at 0.18 and I had Jonas at 0.17. And then to do their actual finish times, Jonas did have to produce more watts per kilo, probably in the order of 10, 15 watts average for the entire course, in order to get to the finish times that they got to.
Okay. And that's even with the difference in CDA. Is it, am I hearing you right there?
That's correct.
Even with that CDA? Yeah.
So, you just need to watch the videos. Even if Jonas and Tadej had the same CDA coming out of the wind tunnel, you could see that Jonas rode more efficiently. His head was in position all the time. Tadej was bopping around a little bit more. The lines they were taking, which it's not your CDA, but it'll be reflected in a CDA number at the end. It was definitely higher. So I set Tadej's CDA a little bit higher by a 0.01. And to get to their finish times, probably about 10 to 15 watts difference. So Jonas would have had to produce 10 to 15 watts more for and this includes their body weight, of course, or takes account for their body weight.
Is watts per meter squared or watts to CDA or something a measurement we should be looking at here instead of watts per kilo?
You can. I would use that a lot more if it was a purely flat stage. There's so much climbing in this stage where the watts per CDA is very applicable to the flatter sections and the downhills, and the watts per kilo are absolutely the important factor on the uphills. Mm-hmm. Which is probably what led to the bike change.
Well, the bike change I want to go back to, but it also goes back to what we were saying earlier about this course just being it's apart from an Opto-Ez time trial or something, it's the most GC contender friendly time trial course you could imagine almost. And then if you take the guy who it's maybe safe to assume that Jonas has the lowest CDA in the Tour de France this year. With those sort of numbers you're suggesting there, I'm going to jump to that conclusion. I don't know if that's fair or not, but he's definitely down there with the lowest. And then he's also the best climber. And you've given him a time trial course where he has also put a lot of time and energy into understanding and learning and knowing that descent like the back of his hand. And again, I'm not going to jump to conclusions here, but there are factors there that start to explain some of this performance.
Absolutely. That, I looking at this, it was just the perfect storm in terms of, course, rider, discipline, execution fatigue, possibly with the competitors. It was just perfect.
I do want to go back to being a bit cynical again, though, or at least I'm not sure what the right word is there, but I want to just ask you, with all the numbers you've ran now, and thinking back to that pre-time or post-time trial press conference, Jonas mentioned that he had been targeting 360 watts. We don't really have much reference as to what exactly that was. He then said that he actually had a really, really good day. He thought his power meter was broke and he was doing 380. Is that the kind of power numbers you're getting when you run these CDA numbers?
No. I
what kind of power numbers are you getting?
Let me I think on the flats, descents, let's see here.
Yeah, like it is important for me to sort of just mention also that this, Jonas has mentioned a power number in a press conference, and he hasn't told us, is that what he was targeting on the flat? Is it what he was targeting on the uphill? I think there was some sort of clarification in there then that was, I think that's what he was targeting for the flat. And then on the climbs, he was obviously doing more, and especially the climb to the finish, he's going to be in, in that final few kilometers, where actually when the real cut de Montsy finishes, it's still then a 3.5 kilometer drag to the finish line. And looking at the timing sheets, it looks like he's taken about 37, 38 seconds out of Pogačar in the final 3.5 kilometers alone, which would also, at least in my mind, suggest that Pogačar has at some point there blown up on that drag to the finish. Sure, there's going to be an aero difference there because Pogačar was on his time trial bike versus, or Vingagaard was on his time trial bike versus Pogačar on a road bike. At that sort of 4 or 5% grade, the time trial bike is going to be faster. I don't know if that's 37 seconds faster or not, but it seems to me like Pogačar maybe was starting to fade, whereas Vingagaard was seemingly only getting stronger. But anyway, I'm going off topic. What kind of numbers were you seeing?
So I heard that that 390, 360 quote, and I called one of the an aero friend, Guru, on one of the teams, and I said, typically, how would the riders ride this hills versus flat? And he says, add 10%, add an additional 10%. So if the flats he's doing 390, add 10% to the climbs. So that's what I stuck into the model. And then to see if it made sense, I verified against, the 4 checkpoints on the course, and sure enough, it fit. So I was using that. So I did 390 and then another 10% on the climbs for Jonas in order to get a model that fit. Now, maybe I'm overestimating the CDA. Maybe I'm underestimating the watts. We don't know. We don't have his power file. But to me, the floor is Dan Bigham in terms of CDA, and the ceiling is the level your eyebrow raises when you quote a watt per kilogram number. So and I'll be honest with you, I have no feel for what's normal and not normal. I don't know. Anybody above my level is abnormal. So.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you take 10% onto your 390 number there, that's 430, and we're deep into the speculating at this point. But if we take 60 kilograms for Vingagaard, which I'm very reluctant to do because we have no idea if that's accurate or not, but you're starting to get very, very high, insanely high watts per kilo figures for an effort mid-time trial in the third week of a Grand Tour.
Yeah. Again, comes back to the numbers you plug in, but it doesn't take very long before you start seeing numbers over 7 watts per kilo.
You mentioned the bike change there. I want to briefly touch on that. It seems now, with the benefit of the hindsight, it seems like it was entirely the wrong idea. Do you the question I have is not really was it a good idea to change bike or not, but more, was changing bike the wrong idea with hindsight, given just how fast they went? With your models that you were saying earlier, you didn't really predict that the results would be this fast. when it's a slower predicted speed, does the bike change start to make more sense? And did Pogacar maybe suffer a bit with his change because he was actually having to go much faster than anybody was anticipating? Maybe, I don't know if that question makes sense, but
I the bike swap makes a bit of sense from the weight perspective, but it makes a lot more sense if you have a big delta in the watts you can produce on the TT bike and the road bike. So if Tadej can produce 400 watts on his TT bike, but he can produce 450 watts on his road bike, then the road bike is starting to make sense. And I don't think
what is the normal drop off there? Is it 10% or 5% or
for these guys? I don't know.
Hybor had told me yesterday in our conversation that Vingagaard has almost a 0% drop from road bike to time trial bike.
So very often, we ask the aero guys from the teams what they want to use as a percentage, and 5% is a number that I've seen used several times. But there's definitely riders that it's more than 5%. Absolutely. And we started looking at one point at the percentage drop off versus the amount of time they spend on their time trial bikes in a year. So teams are actually tracking how much time they spent on the TT bikes, and the correlation between the two is pretty strong.
Well, I probably previously would have said I can't imagine how there could be 0% drop off, but I know from my own numbers that actually, it's an entirely different level, obviously, but I almost have zero drop off from time trial road bike to time trial bike. I think that's more indicative of my road bike performance than my time trial bike performance, but it certainly is possible. The number you've mentioned there, 5%, that's a number that I've heard previously, and again, Hybor was explaining just how much time and effort and energy and dedication Vingagaard puts into his time trial bike. I think we're at the point now where he can't really be credited for that, because if you're a Grand Tour contender and you're not doing that, that's definitely something you're leaving on the table at this point, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't know if Tadej in his recovery could spend less time on the TT bike or had less time to spend on it. That might have been a factor. We'll never know, and that difference between road and TT bike is very individual. It's pretty obvious that Jonas is very comfortable on a TT bike. But for Tadej, I don't think we can ever figure it out.
You mentioned, if there's a good weight saving or significant weight saving between time trial bike and road bike, it starts to make more and more sense. And speaking with Hybor yesterday also, and one thing that was clear from watching the time trial even was how much time and thought Jumbo-Visma had put into making Vingagaard's time trial bike as light as possible. And the same for Van Aert. They had right down to taking the paint off the frame, which they saved about 100 grams on. They had cut the seat post to the absolute minimum insert amount that they possibly could. The same with the riser for the extensions. And what Hybor said was that they had never, I put it to him, did it, the question seemed to be on a lot of people's minds this week as to, should you change to a road bike or should you stay in your time trial bike? And it seemed to me that Jumbo-Visma had asked that question a long, long time ago, given that they had a bike that had no paint on it and they had all these other measures that they were trying to reduce weight. And what he told me was that, yes, they had decided at Paris-Nice that a bike change wouldn't be required if your time trial bike was light enough. That removes the question about moving to a road bike. And so they set about then reducing the weight on that Cervelo P5 as much as possible. And I believe they probably, I know Roglic's time trial bike is 8.1 kilos. So if they did some weight saving here, they maybe got it below 8 kilos. That's a good saving. I also, from what I understand, the new Colnago TT1, which was developed after the UCI relaxed its regulations and done away with the 3-to-1 aspect ratio, that is a phenomenally fast bike on a flat time trial. But because they have been able to use deeper profile tubes and go all out on the aero there, that does come with a weight penalty, and perhaps that was from what I understand, that bike is quite heavy. My own Factor Hanzo, which is developed in the same era, it's touching 10 kilos. Like they're heavy bikes. Do you think that indirectly Pogacar was slightly hampered there, and that his bike was a different time trial in different circumstances and different parkour? He actually might have had an advantage in the bikes, but because of the nature of this parkour, he had a disadvantage on his bike.
Well, we did, for the article that you wrote pre time trial, we calculated roughly, 1 kilogram on that 10% incline is probably the equivalent of 5 watts. Okay. So, 1 kilogram, 5 watts, 2 kilogram, 10 watts. So it's significant, but I don't think it's as significant as the, 20 or 25 watt difference between your position on your time trial bike and your road bike. So, looking at these numbers, there's no one thing that did it. It was the sum of all the little things. So yes, I do think, if you have a 2.5 kilo difference between your time trial bike and your road bike, absolutely makes a difference. But I still believe Tadej knew that 10 watt difference, but he felt that he could make it up in the power he could generate. And then the question was he able to generate it that day? He's obviously cooked after seeing yesterday's stage. So.
Yeah, we fast forward 24 hours and we get an idea of where, Pogacar is fatigue wise. I'm just going to, reiterate once again how phenomenal Pogacar's ride was in the time trial. To be over a minute clear of Wout van Aert and the next place behind him. Usually that next place behind him is going to be second place, but this time it happened to be third place because there was just somebody even higher level on the day. And I want to counter your sum of all the little things a little bit and just say that it seems to me this time it was actually the sum of a lot of things which were actually quite significant. And little things get you maybe a 30 or a 40 second gap, which would have been phenomenal in itself. But here we had a lot of little things which were making big differences, I think, to get a minute and 38.
Yeah, and if we take Jonas out of the conversation, you talk about Wout and Tadej. Now there's a big weight difference, and I used Wout. I got it from some of the cycling stats. I think Wout, I had him at 77 kilos, and Tadej I think I had at 66 kilos. And I look at them, and the number, the delta in their finishing times makes sense. I forget the number I use, but I put slightly more power for Wout, very, very slightly more power for Wout, and things lined up with their times. So that one I'm not that surprised about. Wout was carrying a good 10 kilos more on the bike.
Yeah, I think we've sufficiently gone into the weeds in terms of what we know and what we don't know about both Jonas and Pogacar's performances. The one thing we can be certain of is that they were both. I'm trying to think of the right superlative, but they were pretty impressive. And one being Jonas's was perhaps the most impressive time trial performance we've ever seen.
Absolutely.
The question I want to put to you, given your the work that you do with World Tour teams now, is what are the likes of yourself and the likes of Dan Bigham and tough medicine, and everybody else who's in these positions in terms of performance management and aerodynamics and optimizing everything that goes into World Tour time trials. What are you guys doing now to make sure that we don't get a repeat in future? Like, what kind of analysis is happening? What kind of interventions are going to happen? What sort of upgrades are teams going to look to bring in future to narrow that gap to Jonas, to Jumbo-Visma? And bearing in mind that actually the final time trial of next year's tour is on the final day, and it's around Nice, and it includes a climb. So if we think this year's time trial is decisive with 5 or 6 stages to go, next year's time trial could literally be entirely decisive for the whole Tour de France, and it is going to include a climb also. So you've got 12 months. What are you guys going to do now to narrow that gap?
So I guess, when I started with Astana in 2016, very little was being done. And if I look at what's changed over the last 7 years, it's pretty significant. I don't even think an awareness was completely there back then, whereas everybody's very aware of the importance of aero. I don't think that, in terms of actually doing efficient things about it is as widespread as the understanding of the need. There's a huge discrepancy, I would say, amongst teams. I think some teams are doing exceptionally well, and I don't know what Jumbo is doing, for example, because I've never worked with them. But everything I hear is they're all over this. Like they're doing all the right things, which isn't the same on all teams. I think what
would you consider to be the right thing? Sorry to interrupt there. Is that
so? I think one thing that people are starting to realize, people started to invest a lot of money, for example, in wind tunnels over the last couple of years. I think a lot of people are doing a lot of wind tunnel testing, which is great. But you're getting a lot of, we do all this wind tunnel testing and it doesn't translate into race results. And I think some of the smart people are starting to realize that wind tunnel testing is a tool, a necessary tool, but we have to be doing correlation of wind tunnel to race results. And when they start doing that, they see the gaps, and then they start figuring out where the gaps are coming from, and then they start closing the gaps. That, I believe, closing those gaps is something that not enough of the teams are doing right now, in my opinion.
And that, if I'm like, just to go into what you're saying there, you're doing one tunnel testing, so I assume you're talking about getting CDAs, yep. And then you're correlating it with the race results and working back the CDA, and you're not getting the same CDA. Is that what you're talking about? They're filling in the gaps. Why the change from wind tunnel to road?
Yeah, so we see riders, and I get data files. Here are his wind tunnel numbers. He's a 0.182. Here is his Paris-Nice TT. Here's his power file. Here's his speed. Here's all the data that you need to do an accurate calculation. And he's a 0.205. Why? Okay, and then so you got to figure out the why. Is his power meter reading wrong? Are we using the wrong rolling resistance on the tires, or is the guy's head just spinning around as he's trying to put out big watts? And it's usually all of the above. But his head spinning around, putting out big watts is very often one of the biggest reasons. So you're not going to see that in a wind tunnel. The guys are perfect position in a wind tunnel. They're not so perfect on the road.
And as you mentioned earlier, to go a little bit faster, I can't remember the exact numbers you used, but it was 30% more power to go, I think, 4 kilometers an hour faster from 36 to 40 or something was the numbers you give. And you're not going to do 30% more power. So that's when we always hear maintaining time trial position and positional discipline is so important, because tilting your head the wrong way and increasing your CDA by who knows how much, you're not going to overcome that with whatever extra power you're managing to put out. Is that fair to say?
That's exactly it. Exactly. So you have to. What we see with the riders is when you show them what a difference holding a position makes, in terms of they can go faster, they can actually they can put out a few less watts in order to achieve the same speed. When they see it, they kind of go, oh yeah, okay, and they're actually more conscious about it, and they try harder to hold the position, which Jonas obviously got.
He certainly seemed to understand it, and understanding it's one thing, but the hard part is actually maintaining that positional discipline.
Yeah, you could put a teacup on his head descending, and he probably wouldn't have spilt a drop.
Yeah, I don't think they would let you. I'm pretty sure that would add something to the CDA there. Sorry, I interrupted you there. You were just. I'm fascinated to hear. Obviously, the engine part of it, Jonas has one of the best engines. I don't mean motor doping, but I mean himself as the athlete. It's going to be very difficult for any team to find another Jonas Vingagaard or another Tadej Pogačar. But I am fascinated to hear, what sort of things you briefly mentioned there, closing the gap from wind tunnel to road. But yeah, I think you were going to delve into some other details that engineers and performance analysis and performance managers may be. I'm sure everybody was frantically running numbers and drawing spreadsheets and all sorts on Tuesday evening. Is there anything else that you can draw from what you've seen on Tuesday to?
One of the things that I found over the last couple of years is there are a lot of myths. There's a lot of beliefs that this is faster than that, and you speak to someone and you say, okay, why this? It says, oh, because I read an article, or because Dan Bingham does it, or there's all kinds of myths, and what you see is when you start testing and road testing, you start to debunk some of these myths. And you were at the sports cycling conference just at the opening of the tour. And and Jamie Pringle did an incredible presentation on some of the optimizations they see, and people were very surprised. So things like they go in, they test them, they find the optimal position, and the majority of the time the guy actually comes up in terms of stack rather than going down. They don't shorten the cranks. They all these things, and it was kind of like it was the ultimate session in myth busting. And so that was amazing. And I followed that up. I went to I was doing some testing for an athlete that's preparing for World Masters on the age group side, and we he said, oh, my ultimate tire pressure is this, and I said, no, it's not this, it's that. So another myth, there's 4 watts. We brought him up 2 centimeters in terms of stack. We raised his seat. We found that, a 90 millimeter wheel was no faster for him than a 60 millimeter wheel. But he says, oh, but Remco rides a 90 millimeter wheel. Yeah, but, and all these myths, some of them we would find 4, 5, 6, as many as 7 watts. Some of them we wouldn't see a degradation. And not seeing the degradation, for example, rim depth allowed him to go as fast more comfortably. So, that's a gain. Even if it's a 0 watt gain, the fact that he can ride the course without coming out of aero position is a good thing. So way, way, way too many myths, way too many, people are making decisions. People are purchasing things based on what they think and what someone others aero eyeball is telling them. And that still exists in the World Tour, in my opinion.
That's what I was going to ask you. I think it's easy for us, the general public, to almost have to rely on these myths. You look at what riders are doing and the fastest people in the world, and unless you've got access to a wind tunnel or an aero sensor, and on top of that, all the equipment to test, you sort of have to rely on it. But World Tour teams in the modern era shouldn't really be relying on what they're seeing others doing. But is that happening? Like if we assume Ineos and Jumbo are leading the way in terms of testing and optimization, how many other teams then are just following what they do?
I suspect more than 50%. I kind of see that there's a few teams that really know it. There's another group of teams that have people on staff that I think are still learning a lot. So definitely they're not there. And then there's probably a third of the teams that are just following what everybody else is doing. So I suspect there's less than a third of the teams are really doing the right things with the right people.
And is there a danger then that if everybody is fixated now on Vingagaard's performance on Tuesday, and at least 50% of the other teams are trying to replicate that for next year, well, actually, you're only really bringing yourself up to the level that Vingagaard was at this year, and perhaps he and Jumbo have moved on, perhaps significantly, by the time we do get to next year's tour. And by following like that, you're sort of ensuring that you're always at least 1 year behind, and what seems to be the discipline within cycling where these sorts of differences are really, really going to matter.
Yeah. So you can see some teams maybe pulling ahead more and more and more. On the other hand, maybe this is creating visibility. Maybe some teams are going to say, well, we really need to do something about this before we fall too far behind. And, if I look at what teams are spending on this, that, and whatever's, I don't think aero testing is the most expensive of their expenses, So I would go as far as to say, proper investment in aero is probably a pretty smart investment. Aero testing is not, yes, it's expensive, but compared to what some of these teams are spending in travel and altitude camps and salaries and aero testing is not that expensive.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about visibility there, and I actually, I asked Matthew Hybor yesterday, would you not just publish Vingagaard's data, not even publish it because that makes it very official? Would you not just have him on Strava and have everything uploaded, everything he's doing? And his answer was sort of twofold. The first part was well, would that provide an answer, or would it just add more fuel to the fire? And that's not his words. That's just me sort of, that's my version of what he said. And secondly, it was well, we are in a performance environment, and, its success is sort of almost key to any team's long-term viability. And why would they give away a performance advantage like that? Which I can, in one way I can understand, but again, going back, if they got to the end of this year's tour and then give us a whole deep dive analysis on how they prepared for this year's tour, I dare say they're not going to be resting on their laurels. They're looking to push further and further ahead for next year again. And so again, the competition would only catch up to where Jumbo were this year rather than where Jumbo are going to be next year.
So two parts to that. One is, the transparency of the numbers. Let's give credit to Dan, Dan Bingham, who really opened up, his data and showed us what was possible and how low can you go. And, so I personally, I think the transparency of the data would be a better thing. For them to say, Jonas is a 0.164, fine. It's very easy for other teams to say, oh, we'll just need to get to a 0.164 then. Well,
it's very, very difficult to do.
but a little bit harder to do. The second part of that is, it's funny because at 2017, I was at the tour, and the CEO of Argon at the time had set up a meeting with the folks. I think it was from ASO. It might have been the UCI or it was ASO. And they were considering putting a Notio type device on every bike. And they wanted to do it for two reasons. One, they could get the data and use it for broadcast to make the broadcast more interesting. But they also saw as a way to look for cheaters. So what they figured out is if this device was showing you had an abnormally high power, well, that would raise suspicion, red flags in terms of, superhuman performance. And if you had an abnormally low CDA, that would be, well, maybe there's something other than the powers being applied to the pedals that's moving the bike forward. So they were looking for motor doping. So they saw a Notio type device as kind of like let's see if the data all fits. and let's see if maybe we can figure out if someone is cheating or not.
I mean, I probably don't need to give you my opinion on whether or not I want to see aero sensors on every bike in the peloton. Of course, I do. That would be I think that would be fascinating. Although before this tour, I might have said that broadcasting race radio would be fascinating, and really, it has not been fascinating at all. It's been disappointing, if anything. So, I want to just finish up just on going back to your own background, and you are developing this new aero sensor. Aero sensors in general have they've taken off in that there's more and more aero sensors on the market these days, and there's more coming to market. But they haven't taken off in the same way as, and it's difficult to see if they ever will, but in the same way as power meters have, in that, it's not just the World Tour pros that have a power meter. It's everybody, almost everybody with a high-end bike these days. And, even my dad's bike has a power meter on it, but I couldn't tell you the last time maybe he had even charged it. I'm not sure if he uses it, is kind of what I'm getting at. Where are we at with with aero sensors? How much are these World Tour teams using them in terms of optimizing everything we just talked about? Is that part of closing the gap that you mentioned earlier? And the impossible question, 20 years from now, will they be on every Tour de France bike? Will they be on bikes rolling out of local bike shops? And just general state of aero sensors, where are we at these days?
So I think we released the Notio, I guess, in end of 2016, and I think they have evolved since then, but I do believe they are still a little too complex to use. Complexity isn't a big issue, I guess, at the World Tour level, but if it was to have penetration more into the age group ranks, it still has to become easier. So I think there's a complexity thing. There's definitely an accuracy thing. You can get really good accuracy. We're not at the point where you can just go ride any section of road in one direction and get accurate numbers. I think we're moving towards that, but we're not there yet. So once you start having to introduce protocols and this and that in order to get accurate number, you increase the complexity, etc. So I still think there's some work to be done in terms of accuracy. At the World Tour level, I can't believe teams are not using these things. They should be able to overcome any type of complexity. There's no reason for them not to be using them. I think I've spoken to many teams that have tried, weren't successful, and kind of gave up, which I think is wrong. I think they should persevere and they should seek assistance if they need it, because some teams are having success with it. So I do believe with time, ease of use, accuracy will improve. Price will come significantly down. That's the other thing. I look at the price of some of these aero sensors, and I think it's just way too expensive. Just way too expensive. It has to come down if ever we hope to get. I don't know. I remember early Argon days. They were talking about, well, what if we could get 10% of the power meter market? It's nowhere near that. Could we get 10, 15, 20%? Probably ambitious, but prices is going to have to come down. Ease of use is going to have to improve significantly. It can't be complex. You talk about forgetting to charge your Garmin. If it's one more device to attach, it's one more device to charge. I have a checklist when I go aero testing. If I don't go through my checklist, I forget something.
I tried to write a checklist, but I didn't even know where to start.
My business partner can't remember to bring his speed sensor for his wheel. If he can't do it, I suspect a lot of the masses can't do it either.
Yeah, and going back to Jumbo again for a second, and just how clued in they are. I think I'm going to say that because I think it is evident that they're, if not the most clued in, certainly one of the most clued in teams, and they now also have some of the best riders to go with that. Which and some of the sort of the research that I'm doing this week also into their sort of training the riders and nutrition and all that also suggests that they're just it's not just that they're optimizing their equipment, is that's what explains the performance we've seen this week. There is a heck of a lot more going on that I'm hoping to shed some light on, but I don't know if I'm going to have any success in that or not. But going back to the aero sensors, it was actually something that Hybor himself brought up. I'm assuming he doesn't know that I had one sitting right beside me as I was chatting to him. He wouldn't have seen that on screen. But what he was telling me was that, first of all, they're testing Vingagaard with an aero sensor on the road, going right back to the first year of COVID times, and because the whole world was in lockdown, and that the partner that they were working with wasn't able to be on site, so Hybor himself was doing the aero testing. They had the device on the front of Vingagaard's bike. They were sending the data back to it was Streamlines in the UK, and when the data was arriving, the guys at Streamline there, John Buckley, he thought that the sensor had some sort of issue because everything they were sending through, he just thought that his CDA can't be this low. There's a misreading somewhere. So that tells you how far back that they're going with this, and that they haven't just improved his CDA from last year to this year. But also, he was telling me that 2 years ago, Hybor was telling me about aero mapping that they were doing to really optimize even just wheel selection from one day to the next. And then this year, although they didn't do it on Tuesday, one of the things that they're doing this year is actually sort of using aero sensors and also using riders starting earlier in the stages to correlate all this modeling software and all that they have and all the results that they're getting from their performance modeling, to then sort of make an assessment before the likes of Van Aert or Vingagaard would go later in the day as to whether or not the predictions that they're making and the plans that they're making are right for that day. And I thought that was very, very interesting that they actually, they're. One of the questions I have for you is that something you're seeing other teams doing, that correlation aspect? And then secondly, are aero sensors legal for use in competition? Is there any reason a team couldn't just send one of their early riders off with an aero sensor stuck to the handlebars and grab the data that way?
So, okay. You mentioned people starting to use aero sensors for things other than just going out and measure CDA. And we see a lot of that, or we're starting to see a lot of that. For example, we use aero sensors along with, we'll call it a vibration meter, to measure rolling resistance and impact of road surfaces on rolling resistance. So there's another application other than measuring pure CDA. I've spoken to you about this in the past. We're using aero meters to optimize team time trials. Now, you talk about going and getting 15, 20, 60 seconds. If there were more team time trials, there's a great place to go and get seconds. So we use aero sensors to measure, for example, the savings in position 2 to 7. And we take that information along with physiological data, their critical powers and their W primes, and we build these models, and we can find the optimum pacing, pull time, sequence of riders to get to the finish line, everybody fully depleted as quickly as possible. And we applied that model in 2019 at the Vuelta, and Astana won the team time trial. Now, you don't have to be a cycling expert to know that, Astana is not your typical team time trial.
That was a surprise result.
Well, I like to think I like to think it's all the hard work that the coach, the aerodynamicist, and myself did.
For those of us at the time who didn't know about that work going on in the background, that was a surprise result.
Yes, yeah, but yes. that was the result of taking the piece of technology and applying it in a way that hadn't been applied before. And I think there's several opportunities like that for the technology to be used. And there's a ton more. And I don't think we haven't seen them all. That's for sure.
Mm. Yeah, like I used to have a Notio, and I regret now that I don't have one anymore. But in using it, one of the most fascinating things for me about it, and I never knew what to do with the data, but was just all the data coming out of it in terms of, you had the vibration you talked about, and you had row, and you had all sorts of extra data coming out of the Notio that certainly with the aero sensor I have now, you don't get the same, you don't get all the same metrics. Now, as I said, I didn't know what to do with it at the time, but I did find it very, very interesting what the potential might have been with that data. Going back to my other question, are aero sensors banned for use in competition?
I believe they are. I believe so.
Okay.
So I haven't verified recently. I suspect now the rules, in terms of, what they will allow on a bike. I think the UCI doesn't want a pedo sticking out of the front. Okay, so I think as long as there's going to be a pedo sticking out the front, that's going to be a challenge. You can put the technology. The technology could get embedded into a bike. Now, if you embed it into a bike, and would they allow it? I'm guessing that looking at the rules, it seems they're not as strict about electronics as they are about fabrics and other things. But then again, if it's
I think
not
off-body electronics. I mean, like if off-body electronics, that's maybe off-body sensors. Maybe is a better word. They seem less hooked up on off-body sensors, whereas the likes of, they've already banned lactate sensors, and I don't know of any that are commercially available yet in terms of real-time lactate measuring sensors that a wearable device. So I've always thought that they seem more concerned about on-body sensors than on-bike sensors.
Yeah, I get the impression sometimes. So, for example, if we made let's call it a smart stem. Let's say we take the technology and we know we can shrink it considerably, and we build it into the stem of a bike. There's no rule against that, but they would probably add a rule if they felt that it advantaged one team too much. They'd probably add a rule saying, okay, no electronics allowed in the stem. So, there's lots of room for shrinking stuff and embedding. I have so many handlebars with holes drilled in it, trying to embed this stuff into it. It can be done, but I think it would have to be done in cooperation with the UCI.
I'm going to have to ask a question just for James and Dave who aren't here, but internal cable routing through a stem with an aero sensor built into it. That's
there must be a tool. Yeah, I forget the name of the chap that always talks about buying more tools. There must be a tool for handling that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I'm not sure. I'm not sure there is. I'm going to say I might prefer to see it built into a head unit rather than a stem or a handlebar. But I'll leave that one with you. And I think that's a pretty good place to wrap it up.
Okay.
So thank you for your time, Mark.
That was good. It was all right.
That was it was fascinating conversation, yeah. And just a reminder again to all the listeners: if you enjoy what you heard there, please consider ensuring these sorts of conversations continue to happen and continue to roll out on the Escape Collective's podcast feed by becoming a member over at escapecollective.com. So, without
can I make a final request?
Yes, by all means. Yeah, you have the airwaves there.
An aero TT section in the Discord. The Discord is fascinating. The forum,
yes,
that you can the members get to talk geek stuff, but we definitely need a TT section in the Discord.
And yeah, for those listening who aren't aware of what Mark's talking about, for our members, we have a subscriber option and we have a membership option. The membership option gets you a host of extra access within the Escape Collective, including to our Discord server, and the Aero and Time Trial channel within the Discord that you are requesting there, Mark, is already not in development because I think it's just a click of a button, but it's certainly on the way. You can expect that very very, very soon. You did request that a couple of days ago, and it's been handed up the line. It's on the way. We'll have it any day now.
Thank you.
Good stuff. Thank you.